In London, you might have noticed that there are a lot of different statues commemorating different people. You've probably wondered, who were these people? What did they say or do that was so important to have statues made of them? One of the most prominent statues of the former Prime Minister Winston Churchill. However, in June 2020, as part of ongoing Black Lives Matter protests, the statue in Parliament Square was graffitied with the words "was a racist." This begs the question, why was the statue vandalised? What did he say or do that was so racist? Does he deserve a statue in Parliament Square? This short documentary is going to unearth the dark secrets behind Churchill's legacy and ask the question, what should be done with his statue? Winston Churchill most notably led the British Empire through World War II and is celebrated for defeating the Nazis. Labour leader Clement Attlee remarked, "Without Churchill, Britain might have been defeated." However, only 36% of the public think of him positively, so what did he do wrong?
But perhaps today what the most controversial aspect about his statesmanship has been his contribution to the Great Famine of Bengal in 1943. And of course, as with all famines, there are complex causes, but there certainly is reason to believe that his dilatoriness and his failure to respond immediately to the very urgent calls for relief of the famine, the fact that the state was geared to prioritising the war effort, meant that millions of people did die.
Winston Churchill's cabinet was warned repeatedly that the exhaustive overuse of Indian resources for the war effort could result in famine, but it opted to continue exporting rice from India to elsewhere in the empire. Churchill has been quoted as blaming the famine on the fact Indians were breeding like rabbits and asking how, if the shortages were so bad, Mahatma Gandhi was still alive. Journalists point to Britain's denial policy in the region, in which huge supplies of rice and thousands of boats were confiscated from coastal areas of Bengal in order to deny resources to the Japanese army in case of a future invasion. This was done after the Japanese army conquered Burma in 1942 and had started air raids on Calcutta the same year, and had sunk large amounts of Allied ships in a naval campaign in the Indian Ocean.
And indeed, the new Viceroy of India, appointed in 1943, the Viceroy Wavell, certainly had recorded in his own diary his frustrations at Churchill's government in refusing to respond to urgent calls for sending relief to Bengal, which certainly would have saved the lives of very many people.
Following allegations of historical racism, statues in London are being removed. Prolific slave traders Robert Milligan and Edward Colston statues were defaced and consequently removed to museums following the June 2020 BLM protests. But Churchill still stands. The question is, what should we do with them?
Statues are not there to commemorate or note down history. It is there to glorify it. So I feel like glorifying Churchill unintentionally glorifies his worst actions. So I believe the best option would be to either have a plaque which is Churchill, great man, however, we have to acknowledge his more controversial opinions and that they were of the time. Alternatively, we could move the statue into a museum where it is more likely to be an item used for noting down history instead of, again, glorifying it.
I think he's rightfully celebrated and remembered as a great statesman. He was twice Prime Minister of Britain. He was an author, writer, orator, and perhaps most importantly, he is renowned for leading Britain from military defeat and disaster during the Second World War. So I would say that these controversies are not a distortion of history. I would say that they enrich history. They make us look much more carefully and much more probingly at key individuals who sometimes are far too lionized and celebrated, or indeed looked back upon nowadays with a great deal of nostalgia. So he certainly deserves a place in the pantheon of heroes for what he did in the Second World War, but I think we do history a disservice if we don't look at the darker sides of his career and his legacy.
Churchill's policies definitely impacted the damage caused by the Bengal famine, but we cannot ignore the invaluable contribution he made in World War II. So what is the solution? One solution is putting the statue in a museum with clear signage highlighting his morally complex history. Another solution is putting plaques in the statues, explaining his racist views towards Indians and how his wartime policies contributed to the Bengal famine, how he ignored repeated requests for help from the Indian authorities, which would have ended the famine much sooner than it did and would have reduced the impact of the famine. Either way, people should be aware that statues like Winston Churchill's have a complex history and we shouldn't ignore the past, as dark as it can be.